Okay, so today we're gonna dive into something pretty unique, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and it's a story really that kind of sits right at that intersection of belief and firsthand experience,
Mhm.
and uh, and I think that's always a fascinating area to explore.
Absolutely.
Um, and the focus of this story is this place called the Mehandipur Balaji Temple in Rajasthan, India.
Okay.
Now, we talk a lot about temples, and often temples are, seen as these sanctuaries for seeking blessings and
Yeah.
kind of a place of peace.
Right.
But Balaji Temple it has a bit of a different kind of a reputation.
Oh, really?
It's actually it's widely known as a place where exorcisms are reportedly performed, like openly and on a daily basis
Wow.
for uh, for people who are seeking deliverance from what they believe to be negative spiritual forces.
So it's not really like a typical temple where you go to kind of, seek blessings. You're actually going there to kind of get rid of something?
Yeah, it's almost like the opposite. It's like a place where you go when you're seeking, like I said, deliverance from something that you feel is afflicting you.
That's fascinating and also kind of unsettling to think about.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and it's one of those things where, um, you think about a community that's so deeply rooted in this belief system
Right.
that it manifests in this very like public and intense way.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's really kind of when we look at this narrative that we're going to be exploring today, it's
Yeah.
it's a really powerful lens through which we can examine how these shared cultural beliefs can actually like shape individual experience,
Oh, absolutely.
and often kind of blur those lines between what's subjective feeling and what's perceived as like external reality.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the temple itself almost becomes like this focal point where these beliefs take on a tangible form.
Exactly, and that's what's so interesting about this, and at the core of what we're looking at today, is this experience of three college friends,
Okay.
um, Aman, Ravi, and Pooja, who back in 2017 they found themselves drawn to this temple,
Mm.
and their motivations weren't really rooted in faith.
Okay.
It was more in curiosity, perhaps even a degree of skepticism.
Right.
Um, and despite all of the warnings that are associated with this temple, they may have kind of inadvertently encountered something far beyond their initial understanding.
Oh, wow.
And so what we're going to try to do today in this deep dive is really dissect this account.
Okay.
What can it tell us about the potency of belief,
Yeah.
the influence of specific locations? What can we learn about the nature of these extraordinary experiences?
I think that's a really great goal. And, it's important for us to remember, too, that, regardless of what our perspectives are or our beliefs are for these three people, these experiences were very, very real and impactful. So we need to analyze this with the understanding that this had a real effect on them, whether we want to look at this from a psychological perspective or a cultural perspective or even a spiritual perspective.
Absolutely, and that's something that we always try to do is approach these accounts with that sensitivity.
Yeah.
Um, so let's start by kind of painting a picture of the temple environment itself
Okay.
and those warnings that are associated with it.
Right.
Mehandipur Balaji Temple, it's situated in Rajasthan, which is a region that's just steeped in deep historical and spiritual traditions.
Hmm.
And as we mentioned, it attracts thousands of visitors every single day, but with this very specific purpose,
Right.
to seek deliverance from something.
Yeah, and it sounds like from the account that the atmosphere of the temple is quite different from your typical temple experience.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
it's not like this serene, peaceful setting that you might imagine.
Yeah.
The account describes people exhibiting some really dramatic behaviors.
Hmm.
People who are believed to be possessed are screaming, thrashing, they're crawling on the ground. There are descriptions of voices changing, becoming very guttural, high-pitched, or
Yeah.
even this like complete unsettling silence.
So it's very much like a public display of something that is often kept very private.
Exactly, and that's what's so striking about it, is that it's almost like this public manifestation of something that many cultures tend to kind of keep private.
Right.
But then on top of that, you've got these warnings that are given to visitors,
Right.
and these are things that really stood out to me as being very significant elements of the story.
Yeah. And what were some of those warnings?
So the first one is, do not eat or drink anything inside.
Okay.
So right away, that suggests a sense of vulnerability or a need to maintain a certain purity
Right.
within the temple grounds.
Yeah, like you're more susceptible to something if you were to consume anything there. Yeah.
Exactly. The second warning is do not turn back once you leave.
Interesting.
So there's this sense of finality,
Right.
like a caution against kind of lingering within the temple's sphere of influence.
Yeah, don't look back.
Right. And the most pertinent warning in this story is never take anything home from the temple,
Oh, how?
not even prasad.
Oh, so not even like a blessed offering or anything.
Nothing. And
Yeah.
that's the one that really kind of foreshadows the events that unfold in this story.
Right, because it establishes that boundary.
Exactly. It's like, there's something within the temple that shouldn't be taken beyond its physical location.
Yeah.
So let's talk about our three friends and their visit.
Okay.
The story explicitly states that they weren't believers.
Okay.
They saw the rituals that they witnessed as fake drama.
Wow.
They were taking selfies. They were almost kind of trivializing the experiences of the people around them.
So they were very much like outsiders looking in.
Exactly. And that really highlights this disconnect between their detached observation and the deeply held beliefs of the people who were there.
Yeah, and that's what makes their experience so interesting because they came in with this skepticism.
Right. And yet they still seem to have been affected by something.
Yeah, it's almost like their skepticism set them up for something.
It's possible. And one of the things that's interesting, too, is the story introduces this element of Pooja's feeling of unease.
Okay.
She describes sensing this strange weight in the air, almost as if the temple environment itself was registering their disbelief.
Wow, that's a really interesting detail.
Yeah, it's like this place has a certain awareness.
Yeah, like it can sense your energy.
Right. And then you've got Aman who, despite a direct warning from a priest not to take the prasad, he does.
He takes the prasad.
He takes it.
Even though he was told not to.
Yeah, he laughs it off, he pockets it.
So he completely disregards this warning.
Yeah, and that seems to be a pivotal moment in the story.
Like a turning point.
Exactly. It's almost like that deliberate defiance. That act of taking something that was explicitly forbidden created some kind of a breach.
It's like he opened a door he shouldn't have opened.
Right. And whether that's a literal breach within a spiritual framework or a metaphorical one within a psychological framework is something we can kind of explore.
Right, because it could be interpreted in different ways.
But what happens after they return home is where things get really unsettling.
Okay.
So Aman, that very night, he experiences this very palpable sense of oppression in his room. He says it feels wrong and heavy.
Like something's off.
Yeah. And then he wakes up at 3 a.m.
Oh, 3 a.m.
Yeah, and he sees a motionless shadow in the corner of his room.
Oh, that's creepy.
And then it vanishes.
Just disappears.
Yeah, and the detail about the shadow being motionless is really striking.
It's like it was just observing him.
Yeah, and that's such a primal fear,
Right, like being watched by something unseen.
Exactly. And then his bedroom door creaks open by itself.
Oh, so it gets even creepier.
Yeah, and this just further amplifies this sense of an unseen force that's now at work within his personal space.
Absolutely.
And it's not just Aman who experiences unusual things.
Oh, really?
Pooja reports that her phone starts loudly playing temple chants in the middle of the night.
Yo.
And Ravi's bathroom mirror cracks inexplicably.
Okay, so they're all experiencing these weird things.
Yeah, while they may be less dramatic than what Aman goes through, they're still unsettling events.
Right, and they all seem to tie back to the temple visit.
Exactly, and it really strengthens this idea that their visit had consequences that extended beyond the temple grounds.
And it's like each of these incidents is specific to them.
Yeah, the devotional chants for Pooja, the broken mirror for Ravi.
Right.
It's almost like these incidents are somehow symbolic within the context of the temple's beliefs, or maybe they're even manifestations of their individual anxieties.
That makes sense.
Triggered by the experience.
Yeah, like their subconscious fears are coming out.
Right, but Aman's situation, it continues to deteriorate.
Oh, no.
He stops eating, he becomes withdrawn,
Oh.
and then he starts exhibiting some really bizarre behavior.
Like what?
He'll just sit for hours, whispering incoherently, with this unfocused look in his eyes.
That's really unsettling.
And then there's this detail that he starts muttering in Sanskrit.
Wait, Sanskrit?
Yeah.
But he doesn't know Sanskrit.
He doesn't.
That's really strange.
Yeah, and that's something that we see a lot in these narratives of spirit possession.
Right, speaking in tongues.
Exactly.
That's really creepy.
And from a psychological standpoint, it could be linked to something called cryptomnesia.
Cryptomnesia.
And it's like this subconscious recall of previously encountered information.
Oh, so he could have heard it somewhere and not realized it?
Yeah, it could be that. Or it could be a manifestation of a highly suggestible state,
Right.
especially in an environment where these phenomena are already part of the belief system.
So it could be like his mind is playing tricks on him.
It's possible. And it's at this point that Amon's mother seeks help from a priest. And the priest's reaction when he enters their home is immediate.
What happens?
Amon screams.
He screams.
This deep, guttural sound.
That's not like him at all.
Not at all. It's totally unlike his normal voice.
Wow.
And it happens the moment the priest steps inside.
It's like he can sense the priest's presence.
Yeah, and the priest's questions are very direct.
What does he say?
Where did you go? What did you bring?
So he knows right away.
He seems to understand immediately.
Wow.
And Amon can't answer at first.
Oh, wow.
And then he whispers, I never left.
That's so creepy.
And that statement, I never left, that becomes this central haunting element of the entire story.
It's like whatever came back with him is speaking through him.
Exactly. And it confirms the priest's suspicion that something from the temple has attached itself to Amon.
So it's like a spirit or an entity.
Yeah, the narrative describes it as a temple spirit.
And this really emphasizes that belief that these spirits can attach to people.
Right, and travel with them.
Yeah, like it followed him home.
So they take Amon back to Mehandipur Balaji.
Okay.
And we get this very intense scene of the exorcism.
Wow, and what happened?
There's chanting, burning of mustard seeds,
Oh, wow.
ringing bells close to his ears.
That's a lot of sensory stimulation.
And Amon is screaming, convulsing.
So it's very dramatic.
And then suddenly, silence.
It just stops.
And when he opens his eyes, he's back to himself.
He's back.
But he's weak. He's dazed.
Oh, wow.
And that return to his normal state
Right.
after this very dramatic exorcism, it really validates the effectiveness of the ritual within the story's framework.
It's like the ritual worked.
But there's a final instruction from the priest.
Oh, there's more.
He insists that Amon throw the prasad,
The prasad he took.
into sacred fire
Wow.
and apologize.
So he has to get rid of it and ask for forgiveness?
Yeah, and as Amon does this, he hears a whisper,
What does it say?
now I leave.
As the flames consume the offering.
Yeah, and that's like this ultimate resolution in the narrative. It connects that initial act of defiance, taking the prasad, with the release of this entity, through its disposal and the apology.
So it's like a cause and effect.
Right, and that whispered response, it's like this entity is almost sentient.
Right. It acknowledges what's happened.
And the aftermath of this is significant for all three friends.
Oh, so?
They never discuss the trip again.
Really?
Amon develops an aversion to temples.
Wow.
Pooja starts wearing a sacred thread.
So they're all affected in different ways.
And Ravi refuses to even hear the name Mehandipur Balaji mentioned.
Oh, wow.
And these are really profound psychological impacts.
Yeah. You know, Pooja's adoption of the sacred thread, it suggests that she now feels vulnerable.
Right.
Like she needs protection.
And Amon's avoidance of temples indicates this lingering fear.
Right.
And Ravi's refusal to even acknowledge the temple, it just shows how deep his unease is.
Yeah. He wants to forget it ever happened.
And the narrative ends with this unsettling thought. Persistent accounts of other visitors who feel watched and hear whispers after leaving the temple.
Oh, no.
And this final chilling suggestion.
What is it?
And sometimes at night, in the silence, they hear a voice.
Oh, my gosh.
Soft, low waiting, I never left.
That's terrifying.
And it leaves us with this sense that the influence of this temple might not always be contained.
Right, like it lingers.
Or fully resolved.
Wow.
So we followed these three friends
Right.
on their skeptical visit to this temple.
Yeah.
We saw their disregard for the warnings, the strange events that followed them home, the exorcism, the apparent release, and the lasting impact it had on them.
It's a powerful story about belief and the power of these places.
And it makes you think about the influence of specific locations,
Right?
whether we believe in the supernatural or not.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about certain places that carries a certain weight, a certain atmosphere,
Yeah, you can feel it.
and it can affect people in really profound ways.
Absolutely. And I think the consistency of these reports, you know, regardless of our own beliefs.
Right. Suggests that something is happening.
Yeah, it's not just coincidence.
Mm-hmm. So for our listeners, we leave you with this question.
Okay.
What might explain these accounts and reactions?
Right.
What unseen forces could be at play?
And maybe it's a reminder to consider those warnings,
Yeah.
even when we want to dismiss them.
Good advice.
And one final unsettling whisper from the narrative.
Okay.
Jai Balaji.
Ooh.